The first strange thing about my grandmother's death was that nobody sounded surprised. My phone rang at 12:43 in the morning, which is the kind of hour that makes your body understand bad news before your brain does. I had fallen asleep on the couch with a half-finished beer warming on the coffee table and a documentary still whispering from the television. For one confused second, I thought the ringing was part of whatever I had been watching. Then I saw my mother's name. She did not say hello. She just breathed once, carefully, like she was standing near something fragile, and said, "Your grandmother passed tonight." I sat up. The apartment looked too normal around me. Dirty plate in the sink, shoes by the door, rain ticking against the balcony glass. Nothing in that little room knew my family had just changed shape. Was she sick? I asked. Number she went in her sleep. That should have been comforting, peaceful even. She was 87, and from what little I knew, stubborn enough to have negotiated with death for better terms. But my mother's voice carried no grief I could recognize. It sounded more like relief trying to disguise itself as sadness. I had not been close to my grandmother. Not really. We saw her on certain holidays, always briefly. Always at restaurants or my aunt's house, never hers. When I was very young, I remembered visiting her place once, maybe twice. I remembered lemon cookies, cold rooms, and her hand closing gently but firmly over my eyes when I paused in front of a hallway mirror. "Don't stare," she had whispered, not shouted, not scolded, whispered, as if the mirror might hear. After that, my parents stopped taking me there. Nobody explained why. Families are good at building locked doors out of silence. My mother cleared her throat. "There's something else." Of course there was. The lawyer called before I did. "Your grandmother left you the house." I actually laughed because it made no sense. She had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and I was the one who forgot to call on birthdays. Why me, on the line? My mother went quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "I don't know," but she did know. I could hear it in the way she was not breathing at all. Not even between careful words. By sunrise, I had convinced myself the inheritance was only strange, because grief makes everything feel arranged. That confidence lasted until I saw the house. It sat 40 minutes outside town, past the last gas station, where the road narrowed between fields gone flat and brown for winter. I drove there with the estate lawyer's address open on my phone, though I remembered the turn before the map told me. Some places stay buried in you, even when your family spends decades pretending they do not exist. My grandmother's house looked smaller than it had when I was a child. White siding, green shutters. A porch swing moved in the wind, though there was not enough wind to explain it. Dead flower beds lined the walkway, and a row of silver wind chimes hung from the eaves, knocking together with a nervous sound. Mr. Harlan, the lawyer, was waiting beside his car with a folder under one arm. He gave me the careful smile people use around fresh death. "Your grandmother kept the place in good condition," he said, from outside. That was true. The roof looked sound. The windows were clean. Nothing suggested rot or neglect or madness. Then he unlocked the front door. The smell hit first. Dust, furniture polish, old paper, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. Sunlight crossed the entryway in pale rectangles. Family photos lined the wall. A brass umbrella stand waited beside the door. Normal things. Safe things, except every mirror I could see was covered. The oval mirror above the entry table had a pillowcase tied around it with twine. The mirror over the fireplace was hidden under a yellowed bedsheet, pinned tight at the corners. In the dining room, I saw newspaper taped over a cabinet's glass panels, layer after layer so old the headlines had browned. I did not say anything at first, neither did Mr. Harlan. We walked farther in, our shoes creaking on polished floorboards. Each room carried the same contradiction. Tidy furniture, vacuumed rugs, labeled boxes, and covered glass. It was not cluttered, it was not abandoned, it was maintained. That made it worse. Madness is easier to dismiss when it is messy. This looked like a system. Mr. Harlan noticed me staring and gave an uncomfortable laugh. Older people can become particular, he said. But particular did not feel like the right word. I found the one mirror she had not covered at the end of the upstairs hall, and somehow that felt worse than all the covered ones. Mr. Harlan had moved into the dining room to review papers, leaving me to walk through the house with a yellow legal pad and a set of keys that still felt borrowed. I was trying to act like an adult handling an estate. Bedroom furniture, linens, framed photographs, old medication, cedar chest. I wrote things down because writing them down made the house feel measurable. The hallway stretched from the front stairs to 3 closed doors. Family pictures hung along one wall, all of them slightly faded. At the far end, between 2 narrow sconces, stood a tall antique mirror in a dark wooden frame. It was uncovered, not dusty, not cracked, not filmed with age clean. That was what stopped me. Every other reflective surface in the house had been wrapped, taped, painted, or hidden like it carried infection. But this mirror had been cared for. The wood had been polished. The glass looked freshly wiped. A small braided rug sat beneath it, centered perfectly, as if someone had stood there often enough to need a place for their feet. I called down to Mr. Harlan. Did she mention this one? His footsteps climbed slowly. He appeared beside me, breathing harder than he probably wanted me to notice. Oh, he said, that was all. You saw the others, I said. Why leave this one? He adjusted his glasses and smiled without looking at it directly. Maybe it was too heavy to move. Old houses collect odd habits. It was the kind of explanation people offer when they are hoping you will accept tone instead of logic. I looked into the mirror. My reflection looked back, tired eyes, unshaven jaw, rain-dark coat. Behind me, the hallway ran back toward the staircase exactly as it should. Then I blinked. For 1 second, the reflected hallway did not end at the stairs. It kept going long and dim with doorways I had not passed, sinking into a darkness too deep for morning. I turned around fast. The real hallway was short, ordinary empty. When I faced the mirror again, it was normal. Mr. Harlan cleared his throat downstairs and said the keys were officially mine. That was when I understood that leaving would still take work. By the time Mr. Harlan drove away, the house felt less like an inheritance and more like something I had been locked inside by paperwork. He left me with 2 copies of the will, a ring of labeled keys, and a polite warning that the estate would be easier to sell if I cleared out the personal items first. That sounded reasonable, boring even. I held on to that boringness like a railing, so I started with an inventory. I took pictures of each room before touching anything. I opened drawers with the edge of my sleeve, not because I expected danger, but because everything in that house felt arranged with intention. The kitchen cabinets were labeled. The linen closet had dates written on masking tape. Boxes in the sitting room were stacked by category: taxes, photographs, medical, church, winter. It should have made me feel better. My grandmother had not been living in chaos. She had been organized down to the spoon drawer. Then I began noticing the labels on the covered mirrors. The pillowcase over the entry mirror had a strip of tape across the bottom. In my grandmother's small, slanted handwriting, it said entry, do not remove. The sheet over the fireplace mirror was marked parlor, check pins weekly. In the guest bathroom, the medicine cabinet had been painted over completely, but a note was taped beneath it. Bathroom, safe if sealed. I photographed each one. That was the first smart thing I did. The second was not touching them. Maybe that sounds obvious now, but standing there in daylight, with dust on the mantel and a legal pad in my hand, part of me wanted to prove the house was only weird because an old woman had made it weird. I wanted to lift one corner of a sheet, see my own face, and feel embarrassed for being unsettled. Instead, I kept reading. In the dining room, newspaper had been taped over the glass doors of a china cabinet. The papers were layered so thick the cabinet looked bandaged. On the outermost page, written in red marker, were 5 words, do not remove after sunset. I checked my phone. 4:18 p.m. suddenly. The afternoon light in the windows looked thinner than it had a minute before, and the inventory stopped feeling like a chore. It felt like I had been handed a quiet countdown. The strangest hiding place in my grandmother's house was not behind a loose brick or under a floorboard. It was in the pantry, inside a metal flour bin that still had flour written on the front in cheerful blue letters. I found it because I was looking for trash bags. The pantry shelves were narrow and deep, crowded with mason jars, canned peaches, powdered milk, and rows of spices arranged alphabetically. Normal things again. Domestic things. The kind of things that made the covered mirrors feel even more obscene. Like finding a locked cage in a nursery. The flour bin sat on the bottom shelf. It was heavier than it should have been. When I pried off the lid, I expected stale flour. Maybe mouse droppings. Instead, I found 3 plastic freezer bags wrapped in brown packing tape. Inside the innermost bag was a black spiral notebook, dry and perfectly preserved. On the cover, written in my grandmother's hand, were 2 words, house rules. I almost laughed again, some tired, nervous reflex, but the laugh never made it out. The first page was dated 1979. Rule 1. Keep all mirrors covered unless marked otherwise. Rule 2. Never answer knocking from glass. Rule 3. Do not speak to reflections after dark. Rule 4. Never sleep where a mirror can see you. Rule 5. If someone appears behind you in a mirror, do not turn around until you can hear them breathing. I read that last one twice. The handwriting was steady, not frantic, not scribbled during some breakdown. Each rule had additions underneath it, written over the years in different pens. Certain rooms were mentioned by name. Certain dates had check marks. Some pages listed weather, moon phases, power outages, visitors. Then I found the names. They were written in the margins beside specific rules, some crossed out so hard the paper had torn. Uncle Peter, Aunt Marlene, Ruthie. Daniel, people I had heard about only in fragments, always with the same vague explanations families use when the truth is inconvenient. He moved away. She had problems. We don't talk about him. Beside Daniel's name my grandmother had written looked too long. Heard mother calling. I stood there in the pantry with the notebook open in my hands, suddenly aware of every covered surface behind me. The house was quiet, too quiet, really, for a place with so many rules about not answering things. And that was when my phone rang from downstairs. My mother's name on the screen scared me more than anything in that notebook. For a second, I just watched the phone buzz across the entry table beneath the covered mirror. The pillowcase tied over the glass stirred slightly from the vibration, like something under it had shifted in its sleep. I answered on the 4th ring. "Are you still there?" my mother asked. "No, hello. No, how are you holding up?" "Just that. I'm at the house," I said. "I found something." Her breathing changed. It was subtle, but after reading my grandmother's rules, I was listening for every small human sound. "What did you find?" "A notebook. House rules. Silence. Mom, you need to leave." "I'm trying to understand what this is." "There's nothing to understand," she said too quickly. "Your grandmother was old. She had beliefs. She got worse after your grandfather died. That's not what this looks like. It doesn't matter what it looks like." I looked toward the dining room where the taped china cabinet sat in fading daylight. The red words on the newspaper seemed louder now. "Do not remove after sunset." "There are names in here," I said. "Peter, Marlene, Daniel." My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a sob. Not a gasp. More like she had put a hand over an old wound without meaning to. "Don't read that book." "Why?" "Because your grandmother wanted people afraid. That was how she kept control." It was a good explanation, clean, psychological, almost comforting. I wanted to believe it. Then she added, "Hire movers, hire cleaners, I'll pay for it. Put the house on the market and never sleep there. Do you understand me?" Outside, wind pushed through the chimes on the porch, setting off a thin, metallic whisper. "Mom," I said carefully, "why didn't we ever visit her here?" Another silence. "When your grandfather died," she said, "your grandmother started seeing things. Reflections, people who weren't there. She scared us. She scared you. I don't remember that. You were little. I turned without meaning to and looked up the stairs toward the hallway where that uncovered mirror waited. My mother's voice dropped. You haven't looked in the hall mirror, have you? Every honest answer caught in my throat. No, I lied. She exhaled shackily. Good. Then leave before dark. The line clicked dead. I stood there listening to the empty dial tone, realizing she had not sounded worried about me finding the notebook. She had sounded worried I had already been seen. The worst part was that the mirror did not do anything when I wanted it to. That made it easier to doubt myself, which I think was part of the design. After my mother hung up, I stood in the entryway until the phone screen went dark in my hand. The smart thing would have been to leave then. I know that. I have replayed that moment more than any other. But there is a difference between fear and proof, and at that point all I had was a dead woman's notebook, my mother's panic, and a hallway that had looked wrong for less than a heartbeat. So I decided to test it. I went to my car, grabbed the small tape measure from the glove box, and left the front door open behind me. That felt important. A straight path out. Sunlight still touched the porch. My keys stayed in my pocket. I told myself I was being cautious, not brave. The upstairs hallway measured 22 feet from the top stair to the wall beneath the mirror. I measured it twice, then marked the floorboards with blue painter's tape from a drawer in the kitchen. Nothing moved. Nothing whispered. The mirror showed me kneeling with the tape measure, looking pale and ridiculous. Then I used my phone. I set it on a bookshelf facing the mirror and recorded the hallway for 5 minutes while I stood at the stairs. When I watched the video back, everything was normal. 22 feet of old floorboards, 3 closed doors, 1 antique mirror reflecting a man trying not to believe in his own nerves. I almost stopped. Instead, I remembered what had happened the first time. I had not been staring directly. I had blinked. I had caught it wrong, sideways. So I turned my back to the mirror and looked at it only through my phone's front-facing camera. For 30 seconds, nothing changed. Then the hallway and the screen stretched, not dramatically. Not like some movie effect. It simply kept going past the stairs, as if the house had remembered extra space. The blue tape marks repeated into the distance. Doorways appeared where no doorways existed. I turned around. The real hallway was short. I looked back at the phone. Long again. My mouth went dry. I did the only thing I could think to do. I hit record, and from somewhere beneath my recorded breathing came a voice. Low enough to be mistaken for the house settling at first, too human to ignore or explain away. I did not recognize the voice until I heard it through headphones. At first, I played the recording straight from my phone speaker, standing in the upstairs hallway with 1 foot angled toward the stairs, ready to run if the house decided to answer back. The audio was mostly my own breathing, floorboards settling, the faint tick of the old thermostat downstairs. Then, under all of that, something whispered. I replayed it 6 times. The word was soft enough to hide inside static, but shaped enough that my brain kept leaning toward meaning. I told myself it was compression noise. Maybe the microphone had dragged my breath into syllables. Maybe some pipe in the wall had knocked at the wrong frequency. Those explanations sounded better before I found my earbuds. With the sound sealed directly into my ears, the whisper became intimate. Close, not loud, just placed wrong, as if someone had leaned over my shoulder during the recording and spoken into the tiny gap between my skull and the plastic. Jamie. Nobody called me Jamie anymore. My name is James at work. I was James, on bills James. To my friends, usually Jim. But when I was very small, before my family stopped bringing me to that house, my grandmother had called me Jamie in the same soft voice she used when she set lemon cookies on a napkin and told me not to touch the covered things. I went downstairs because staying beside that mirror suddenly felt like volunteering. In the sitting room, I dug through a box labeled Family, VHS transfers, and found an old flash drive. Most files were birthdays, Christmas mornings, shaky footage of cousins I barely remembered. Then I found one from 1997. My grandmother sat in the background of my aunt's kitchen while toddler me stacked plastic cups on the floor. Someone behind the camera said, "James, look here." My grandmother corrected them gently. Jamie saw me voice, saw me shape of the vowel. I backed out of the video and opened my recording again, hoping comparison would ruin the fear. This time, after the whisper said my name, there was another sound I had missed. 4 words, so quiet they seemed embarrassed to exist. You came back too late. The hallway upstairs creaked once, not settling. A single board under patient wait. I stood frozen, alone, listening for the next careful step above me. The locked room upstairs was the only door in the house that seemed determined to stay shut. It was at the far end of the hall, 2 steps from the mirror. I had avoided that part of the house after hearing the floorboard move above me, but fear has a strange relationship with evidence. Once you know something impossible has happened, every closed door becomes worse than whatever might be behind it. The key ring had labels in my grandmother's handwriting. Kitchen, cellar, linen, back porch. None said nursery, but one small brass key had been wrapped with white thread. It fit the lock after 3 tries and a little pressure. The room opened with a dry wooden sigh. At first, I thought it was storage. Dust sheets covered most of the furniture, and cardboard boxes were stacked along one wall. Then my eyes adjusted to the gray light, and the shape in the center became a crib. Not a modern one. Old white painted wood, yellowed at the bars with a folded blanket inside. Above it hung a mobile of faded cloth stars that turned slowly, though the air in the room felt still. The walls were covered with mirrors, small ones, child-sized ones, round, square, oval, some with cartoon animals painted on the frames. Every single one had been covered with brown paper and tape, the way someone might board up windows before a storm. I checked the closet instead. Inside were baby clothes sealed in plastic, a box of rattles, and a photo album with no title. The first pages showed my grandmother younger than I had ever seen her, holding an infant in a blue blanket. My grandfather stood beside her, smiling too hard. On the back of the photo, someone had written, Daniel, 6 weeks. Daniel, the name from the notebook. I turned the page and found a framed hospital photograph tucked loose between the plastic sleeves. Same baby, same blanket. But the eyes stopped me. They looked like mine. Not in the vague way families say babies resemble everyone. The shape, the uneven left eyelid, the dark ring around the iris. It was like seeing my own face before it had learned to become me. Behind the photo was a folded envelope, brittle with age. On the front, written in my grandmother's careful hand, were the words, for Jamie, when the house finally brings him back. Outside the nursery, the hallway mirror gave one soft knock against the wall, as if it wanted an answer. I almost did not open the envelope, because some part of me understood that paper can be a door. It had been waiting behind Daniel's photograph for longer than I had been alive. Folded so tightly the creases had gone soft. I carried it out of the nursery before reading it. That room felt too prepared for a child who was dead, too carefully preserved for grief alone, and the covered baby mirrors on the walls seemed to follow me without reflecting anything. In the hall, the antique mirror stood quiet. I kept my back angled away from it and sat on the top stair, close enough to run if I had to, far enough from the nursery that I could pretend I was only reading a family confession. The letter began with my name, Jamie, if you are reading this. Then I failed to tell you while I still had a human mouth to say it with. That sentence stopped me for a full minute. My grandmother's handwriting was smaller than in the notebook, shackier, but not confused. She wrote like someone choosing every word because the wrong one might be overheard. She said mirrors were not doors. Not exactly. Doors suggested 2 sides and a handle. Mirrors, she wrote, were places where absence learned your shape. Most people passed in front of them too quickly for anything to matter. But grief made people stand still. Grief made people invite what looked familiar. After my grandfather died, she saw him in the hallway mirror. Not a shadow, not a memory him. Standing behind her in the reflected hall, younger than he had been at the end, wearing the blue shirt he was buried in, he looked frightened. He pressed one hand to the glass and mouthed that he was cold. She knew better, she wrote. Then, beneath that line, I uncovered the parlor mirror anyway. I read those words twice, hating her and pitying her. For 3 nights, she saw my grandfather in different rooms. He begged to come home. He cried without sound. On the 4th night, he smiled with too many teeth. That was when she understood something had found the outline of her love and climbed inside it. The last line on the page was underlined hard enough to tear the paper. It wears what you miss first. The next page explained why the hallway mirror had been left bare. And I remember feeling almost grateful at first because an explanation is a kind of rope. Then I understood it was a noose. My grandmother wrote that after the thing wearing my grandfather's face began moving between rooms, she tried what any sane person would try once sanity had been stripped down to instinct. She covered every mirror in the house. For 1 hour, it worked. No faces, no whispering, no reflected hallway stretching into places the house had never built. She sat at the kitchen table with a hammer beside her coffee cup and believed she had won by refusing to look. Then the windows went dark from the inside. Not night dark, not storm dark, mirror dark. In every pane of glass, she saw the kitchen behind her duplicated wrong, full of corners that bent away from themselves. The kettle reflected a hand resting on her shoulder, though her real shoulder was bare. A carving knife on the counter showed my grandfather standing at the cellar door, smiling that broken smile. She wrote, "Pressure needs a mouth." That was the phrase. If every mirror was covered, the thing did not leave. It spread. It looked for smaller surfaces, cleaner surfaces, anything that could return an image with enough shape for it to crawl through. Windows, water, silverware, picture glass. The black screen of an unplugged television. Once she saw it in my aunt's eye while my aunt was asking for more sugar, so she chose one mirror. The hallway mirror faced no bed, no dining table, no bathtub, and no doorway where a child might stand half awake at night. It was placed at the end of a controlled line, away from ordinary habits. She polished it every Sunday, checked the floorboards around it, and kept the braided rug beneath it so she would know exactly where to stand when she had to watch. Not speak, not answer, watch. The other mirrors were not covered to hide from the thing. They were covered to give it only one way to be seen. I looked up from the letter then, because the house had gone so still that even the old pipes seemed to be listening. Down the hall, the uncovered mirror waited in its dark frame. For the first time, it did not look like the mistake in the house. It looked like the drain, and every sheet, every strip of tape, every painted cabinet and wrapped picture frame suddenly seemed less like superstition than plumbing in a system I had just inherited, without knowing how close it was to bursting, or what would happen if it did again. The sensible part of me decided the house could be dangerous and still not be impossible. That sounds ridiculous now, but panic needs tasks. I folded my grandmother's letter, put it in my coat pocket, and walked downstairs with one hand on the railing and the other holding my phone like it was a weapon. I told myself I was leaving. I was not abandoning anything. I was preserving evidence, getting help, and coming back with people, daylight, and maybe a priest if my pride survived the drive. The front door opened normally. That small mercy almost broke me. Outside, the porch air tasted cold and metallic. My car waited in the gravel beside Mr. Harlan's tire tracks. I got in, locked the doors, and turned the key. Nothing, not a weak cough. Not a clicking starter. The dashboard stayed black. I tried again. Then again, because denial is just repetition with hope attached. Still nothing. I popped the hood, checked battery cables I barely understood, and found them clean. No corrosion, no loose clamp. I called roadside assistance before I could talk myself into going back inside. The call connected, rang twice, then became static so thick it sounded like rain poured directly into the receiver. My phone showed full bars. I tried texting my mother, found letter, leaving now, car dead, call me. The message hung blue and unsent. I sent Mr. Harlan the same thing, then a photo of the letter, then my location. Each one failed while the signal icon remained smugly perfect. Back inside, I checked the breaker box because practical fear is still fear. Power worked. Refrigerator hummed. Lamps turned on. The television's covered black screen gave back no reflection beneath its sheet. My phone buzzed. For one bright second, relief opened in my chest. But no message had arrived. I was standing near the stairs then, close enough to see the hallway mirror above me. In its glass, my phone screen glowed in my hand. In the reflection, my texts had sent. Every one of them had replies. They were all from Grandma. The newest read, "Do not leave after dark." Another appeared beneath it while I watched. It said, "He knows you read the letter." The sun slipped behind the trees outside the silent house, where no birds made any sound. From upstairs came 3 careful knocks, delivered from inside the glass. The knocks were polite, and that was what made them unbearable. Not frantic, not angry. 3 measured taps from upstairs, each one spaced like a knuckle touching glass in a house where everyone else was asleep. I stood at the foot of the stairs with my phone in my hand, watching the last orange line of daylight fade across the wall. My grandmother's notebook lay open on the entry table behind me. Never answer knocking from glass. I had laughed at that rule less than an hour earlier. Not out loud, maybe, but somewhere inside myself. In the private place where people dismiss impossible things so they can keep functioning. Now I understood the rule was not meant to sound sane. It was meant to be remembered when sanity stopped being useful. 3 more knocks came. This time, after the 3rd tap, the house held its breath. "Jamie." My grandmother's voice. I did not move. The sound came from the upstairs hallway, but not through the air exactly. It had a flattened quality, like a voice pressed against a window. My phone was still recording. I made myself lift it, thumb shaking, camera pointed toward the dark staircase. "Jamie, please," she whispered. I made a mistake. Everything in me wanted to answer. That is the part I hate admitting. Not because I believed it was really her, but because grief does not require belief. It only needs a familiar shape to step into. I backed away from the stairs without turning around. The voice changed. James, that was my mother. Not an imitation of her voice from memory. Her exact, tired, careful tone. The one she used when she was trying not to cry in front of me. "James, I'm on the road," she said. I shouldn't have hung up. I was coming to get you, and I hit something. I think I hit a tree. My hand tightened around the phone. "Please open the door." The front door was 6 feet behind me. The voice was still upstairs. I forced myself to breathe. Then I opened my contacts and called my mother 1 ring too. On the 3rd, she answered from somewhere quiet, television murmuring in the background. "Did you leave?" she asked. The voice upstairs began to sob with her mouth. I stared at the covered entry mirror, at the pillowcase trembling on its string, and whispered, "Mom, lock your bedroom door, and do not look into any glass tonight, no matter what happens." What answered from upstairs was not my mother anymore. The crying stopped mid-breath, cut off so cleanly it made the silence feel edited. I kept my real mother on the phone, one hand clamped over the speaker so nothing in the house could borrow more of her voice than it already had. "James," she whispered. "What's happening?" "Stay away from mirrors," I said. "Cover your windows if you can. I'll call back." I hung up before she could argue, because love was becoming a surface the thing could use. From the hallway above came Mr. Harlan's voice, mild and embarrassed. "There's been a misunderstanding with the documents," it called. "If you'll just come upstairs, we can correct it." I almost laughed then, not because it was funny, but because the mistake was so human. Harlan would never come back after dark for paperwork. He was the kind of man who locked his office at 5 and treated weekends like a legal boundary. When I did not answer, the mirror tried someone else. A friend from college, my old manager. My father, dead 5 years, saying my name with the exact roughness cigarettes had left in his throat. Each voice arrived with a hook attached, some memory sharp enough to hurt. A bar in Madison, a hospital room, a birthday I had forgotten. But the facts were wrong. My father asked about the dog we never owned. My college friend mentioned a dorm we had only visited once. It knew the emotional shape of things, not the architecture. It could find bruises, but not dates. I wrote that down in the margin of my grandmother's notebook, because if terror was going to take me, I wanted it to find me taking notes. Can access feelings, not facts, tests reactions. The pen paused. In the oval entry mirror still covered by the pillowcase, my reflection should not have been visible at all. But in the black screen of my phone, dark now in my hand, I saw myself standing there. Only reflected, me was already writing. His pen moved 3 words ahead of mine, do not think. My own hand jerked before I finished the T. Upstairs, the voice became mine, not how I sound on recordings, not close enough to dismiss. Me exactly, tired and afraid and speaking from behind the glass. It's learning faster when you listen, my voice said. Then, after a small pause, it added, so cover me if you're brave. It wanted impatience, pride, panic. It wanted me to make the next mistake. I covered the hallway mirror because every rule in that house had started sounding like a dare. That is the truth. I can call it strategy. I can say I was trying to interrupt the thing, blind it, force it to stop using my voice. Underneath was a simpler instinct. I wanted it shut up. The nearest sheet was draped over a love seat in the upstairs sitting room. I grabbed it without looking at the mirror directly, kept my eyes on the floorboards, and moved fast. My grandmother's notebook said not to answer. It said not to speak. It said one mirror had to remain open, but fear convinces you the rule you break is the reasonable one. The glass seemed ordinary until the sheet touched it. Then something pulled back. Not hard enough to yank the fabric from my hands, but enough that the cloth tightened across the frame like it had caught on a nail from the other side. I pinned the corners anyway, hands shaking, breath loud. The mirror disappeared beneath white cotton. For 3 seconds, the house was peaceful. Then the television downstairs turned on. I heard no click, no surge of power, just a hiss blooming through the floor. I ran down and found the set in the parlor glowing beneath its cover. Its black screen, visible through a gap in the sheet, reflected a staircase that did not exist, descending from the ceiling into a room of hanging coats. In the kitchen, a spoon lay on the counter. Its curved back showed someone standing behind me. I turned empty room. The sink faucet began to drip. Each drop gathered in the basin without spreading, forming a trembling circle of water beneath it. A face pressed upward from the dark, features flattened and patient. I threw a dish towel over it and backed away. Everywhere I looked, the house was slowly making new eyes. Picture glass, brass knobs, the wet shine on the refrigerator handle, even the dark window above the sink. That was when I understood. The hallway mirror had never been the wound. It was the drain. I ran back upstairs to uncover it, but the sheet was no longer loose. It was stretched tight, sucked inward against the frame, as if something inside had sealed its mouth around the cloth and was breathing through it. The first face in the mirror was my grandfather's, and I knew him only from photographs. The sheet would not come free. It clung to the glass with a damp inward pull, as if the mirror had learned suction. I gripped the fabric with both hands, planted one foot against the baseboard, and tore it sideways. The hallway mirror opened. I stumbled back so hard my shoulder hit the opposite wall. The reflected hallway was no longer empty. People stood in it. Not one person, not the thing wearing my voice. A crowd, arranged through the rooms behind me, as if the house in the glass had filled while I was downstairs. Some stood at doorways. Some sat on furniture I could not see in the real hall. Some were half hidden behind corners that did not exist. I recognized a few from family albums. My grandfather was closest. He looked younger than the funeral photos, but not alive. His skin had the gray smoothness of wax, and his eyes had the patience of someone waiting after the last train. He wore a blue shirt buttoned to the throat. Behind him stood Aunt Marlene, though I had only met her once before she moved away, or before that was the story they gave children. Uncle Peter leaned against a reflected doorframe, his head angled wrong, listening. There were others too, cousins, great-aunts, faces I had seen labeled in Christmas boxes and obituary clippings. Some looked sad, some looked empty. A few smiled with expressions that had nothing human underneath them. I kept my mouth shut. That may be the only reason I survived those first seconds. My grandmother's rule stayed in my head like a hand over my lips. Do not speak to reflections after dark. My grandfather lifted one hand. It did not touch the glass. It hovered near it, trembling. His mouth moved. No sound came out. I should have looked away. Instead, I watched his lips shape the words again and again until meaning forced itself through my fear. She promised you. The hallway behind me was empty. I knew it without turning because I could hear nothing breathing there. Then every reflected face shifted its gaze from me to the closed bedroom, my grandmother's room. And I knew the answer was not in the mirror. It was somewhere she had hidden from it all this time. The drawer in my grandmother's bedroom had been locked from the inside of her life. That was how it felt. Anyway, her room was painfully ordinary after the hallway mirror. A narrow bed made with a blue quilt. Slippers tucked beneath the nightstand. A rosary looped around a lamp. On the dresser, every framed photograph had its glass painted over with matte black brushstrokes, leaving only the faces visible through uneven windows. I found the key taped beneath the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder wrapped in wax paper and tied with butcher's string. My name was written across the front, not James. Jamie, the first document was an adoption petition. I read it 3 times before the words began arranging themselves into something I could understand. My parents' names were there. My grandmother's signature was there as witness. The date was 2 months after my birth certificate said I had been born. Underneath were hospital records from a county I had never lived in, and a death certificate for an infant named Daniel Michael Reeves. Date of birth, same as mine. Date of death, 6 weeks later. I sat on the edge of her bed because my legs stopped trusting me. There were photographs, paper clipped to the back. Daniel in the blue blanket. Daniel in the nursery. Daniel beside the hallway mirror, held in my grandmother's arms, both of them reflected clearly. Then one final photograph. A baby I knew was supposed to be Daniel stared at the camera with my uneven left eyelid, my dark ringed irises, my tiny crooked mouth from every baby picture my mother kept in albums. On the back, my grandmother had written, "Exchange accepted, balance deferred." I did not know what that meant until I found her notes. They were written on loose pages, each one dated after Daniel's death. She wrote that the mirror had taken the wrong child first, then returned something breathing when she begged. She wrote that my parents were told never to question why the baby looked different after the fever broke. Different, that word emptied me. I was not simply the grandson who inherited the house. I was the receipt. From the hallway, the reflected crowd made no sound, but the bedroom door slowly darkened, shining in the lamplight like wet glass. My phone rang in my pocket. This time, when I saw my mother's name, I understood she had been waiting my whole life for this call. And I had finally become old enough to ask the right questions alone. My mother answered like someone picking up a ringing phone beside a hospital bed. "Tell me what you found," she said. Not hello, not are you safe. She already knew the shape of the disaster. She was only waiting to hear which part had reached me first. I sat on my grandmother's bed with the adoption papers spread across the quilt. The bedroom door had become glossy in patches, reflecting the lamp as a smear of yellow light. I kept my eyes on the documents. Was I adopted? Her silence was not surprise. It was surrender. "Yes," she whispered. Was Daniel real? This time she made that wounded sound again, smaller than before. "He was my nephew," she said. "Your grandmother's favorite. My brother's boy, he got sick. Fever, they said. One night he stopped breathing. And me, I don't know where you came from." The sentence landed so quietly I almost missed the damage inside it. She told me my grandmother had called the family before dawn, hysterical, saying Daniel was alive again. But the baby in the crib was not Daniel. His face was close enough to make people argue with themselves, but not close enough to believe. Different eyelid, different eyes, different cry. My brother refused him, she said. Your grandmother said the house had given back what it could. She begged us not to waste a miracle. So my parents took me. That was the story under my life. Not love first, not paperwork first. A house, a dead child, and a family too broken to ask what was breathing in the crib. She believed the mirror spared you, my mother said, or made you, or traded something for you. I don't know anymore. Why didn't you tell me? Because reflections followed you when you were little. My mouth went cold, she said. Mirrors showed Daniel beside me aging as I aged. In shop windows, bathroom glass, the black television at night. A second boy, always a little behind me, always watching like he was waiting his turn. We left because your grandmother said he was getting clearer. The bedroom door reflected my face now. Behind it, in the shine, stood my mother. But her voice was still in my ear. James, the real one sobbed. Whatever it shows you, don't bargain. Don't apologize, and don't let it see you cry. Then, very slowly, the version in the door lifted one finger to its lips, smiling with my mother's patient mouth, while the phone line filled with distant knocking from glass. The thing in the door smiled with my mother's mouth, and for 1 second I hated myself for wanting to run toward it. That is the part nobody tells you about fear. It does not always push you away from danger. Sometimes it shoves you straight into the shape of someone you love. The glossy patch on the bedroom door widened until the wood looked varnished with black water. My mother stood inside that shine, not in the room, not behind me, but in the impossible depth of the reflection. She wore the robe she slept in when I was a kid. Her hair was pinned back badly. Her eyes were wet. James, she whispered, while the real phone in my hand crackled with static. I'm sorry. I pressed the speaker tighter to my ear. Mom, say something. Through the line, her real voice came faint and broken. Don't answer it. The reflection tilted its head in perfect imitation. She doesn't understand, it said. She never did. She let your grandmother keep the truth because she was afraid of losing you. That almost worked. Not because I believed the thing cared about truth, but because truth had already been used on me that night like a blade. Adoption papers. Daniel's death certificate. My grandmother's notes. My whole life reduced to a bargain nobody had explained. The reflected mother lifted one hand and placed it against the inside of the door. If you stay here, she dies, it said. My chest tightened. The real line hissed. James, listen to me. Whatever it says, it wants you closer. I asked the reflection the first question that came to mind. The kind of stupid private question only my mother would know. What did you give me the night Dad died? The reflection smiled softly. Your father's watch. Wrong, me father's watch had gone to my uncle. My mother had given me his old grocery list, folded in his wallet because it still had his handwriting on it. The thing's smile faltered, but only for a second. Then the shiny door changed. I saw my mother's bedroom, her real bedroom, miles away, the quilt, the lamp, the narrow window beside her bed. My mother lay asleep under the covers with the phone still near her hand. In that window, something dark stood reflected behind her. Not in the room, in the glass. Behind me, the hallway mirror gave one patient knock, as if counting down the seconds I had left. My mother's voice whispered through the phone, James. The reflection leaned closer from the door. Now it said, come closer or watch what you cost her. I did not come closer. That may sound brave from the safe side of the story, but it was not bravery. It was arithmetic. Every time I obeyed fear, the house gained ground. Every time I reacted without thinking, another surface opened. The thing had shown me my mother because it knew love could make a person stupid faster than terror could. So I made myself look away from her bedroom window in the reflection. Not at the door, not at the mirror, at the floor. The carpet beside my grandmother's bed had a corner lifted barely, where years of vacuuming had loosened the tack strip. I remembered the way every important thing in that house had been hidden inside something ordinary. Flower bin, photo album, bottom drawer. I dropped to my knees and pulled. The carpet came up with a dry, tearing sound. Dust rose around my hands. Beneath it, taped directly to the floorboards, was a sealed envelope flattened by time. On the front was one sentence, if Jamie is alone after dark. The hallway mirror knocked again. I opened the envelope with my teeth. Inside was a single page written in my grandmother's smallest handwriting. If it has begun using the people you love, Then it is hungry enough to bargain. Do not bargain. Do not break the mirror. Do not cover the mouth unless you want it breathing through everything else. Below that, one final rule: starve it until sunrise. The instructions were practical, almost cruelly calm. Make every reflection useless. Not just mirrors, windows, water silver, screens, polished wood, picture glass, doorknobs, eyes if necessary. Give it nowhere clean to complete a face. Do not speak. Do not apologize. Do not name the dead unless you mean to call them. My hands stopped shaking because they finally had work. I tore the painted photographs from the dresser and threw them face down. I wrapped the lamp base in pillowcases. I smeared cold cream over the shiny patches on the bedroom door until my mother's reflected face blurred into nothing. The thing screamed then, not loudly, privately, inside my teeth. I took that as proof I was doing something right. I ran downstairs for paint, flour, blankets, dirt from the dead flower beds, anything dull enough to ruin shine. The hallway mirror watched me pass. This time I did not watch back. By the time I finished the downstairs windows, the house looked less haunted than vandalized. That was almost comforting. Fear prefers elegance. It wants candles and whispers and impossible faces behind you. There was nothing elegant about me dumping flour into the sink, smearing mud across picture frames, wrapping silverware in dish towels, and painting over the television screen with cellar primer. I was sweating, coughing dust, moving room to room with my grandmother's last rule folded in my pocket like a warrant. Make every reflection useless. I started with obvious surfaces: windows, the microwave door, the brass clock in the parlor, the glass over family photographs. Then I got smaller: spoon handles, cabinet knobs, the polished curve of the kettle, a rain puddle near the back door where my boots had dragged water in. Every time I dulled one surface, another seemed to wake. The wallpaper above the dining room chair darkened with moisture, glossy as an open eye. Paint bubbled on the hallway trim and peeled back in wet strips that caught my face in thin, distorted pieces. In the parlor, my grandmother's portrait changed. Not the painted face itself, but the blacked-out glass over it. Two tiny reflections appeared where her eyes should have been, showing the upstairs hallway behind me. I turned the frame around. Something laughed once from the kitchen faucet, then choked when I packed the drain with flour and rags. The house was adapting. That thought should have made me stop. Instead, it made me faster. If it had to improvise, then starvation was working. Near midnight, I reached the last uncovered window, the narrow pane beside the front door. Outside, the yard lay flat under moonlight. The dead flowers were pale. The wind chimes hung still. Then my grandmother stepped into view. Not young, not wrong-faced. My grandmother as I remembered her from those restaurant holidays, small and severe in her gray coat, holding a folded white sheet in both hands. She did not knock. She did not speak. She simply looked at me through the glass and shook her head. I lifted the paintbrush anyway. Her expression sharpened. She raised one hand and pointed, not at the hallway mirror, not at the window, at me. And in the dark glass, beneath my own exhausted face, I saw my eyes shining enough to reflect the room behind them. The last reflective surface in that house was not glass. It was me. I understood that while my grandmother's shape stood beyond the front window, pointing with a hand that had tucked napkins under my chin when I was small. For hours I had treated the house like a crime scene with physics. Cover the mirrors, mud the windows, drown the shine, remove every clean surface the thing could use to finish a face. But my eyes were still open. Worse than that, my mind was. Every memory I had turned reflective the moment I tried not to think about it. My grandmother closing her palm over my eyes. My mother refusing to visit, Daniel's blue blanket. The baby in the photograph wearing my face before I had earned it. Each thought gave the thing a little polish, a little depth. The window darkened around my grandmother until she looked painted in smoke. Her mouth moved once. Name what it took. I knew what she meant before I wanted to. The house had survived on silence. Not just covered mirrors, but covered facts. A dead child renamed as distance, an adoption disguised as mercy, a bargain filed away in locked drawers and nervous phone calls. My family had not protected me from the truth. They had protected the thing from being named. Behind me, the hallway mirror knocked. On sa, not impatient now. I backed away from the front window and went to the sitting room, where the hospital records lay scattered across the floor. My flashlight beam shook over the death certificate until it found the line I needed. Daniel Michael Reeves, 6 weeks old, dead before he had enough life to become anyone's story. The name felt too small for what had been built around it. I carried the paper back toward the hallway. The house seemed to lean inward. Under blankets and paint and flour, the covered surfaces began to stir, not loudly. Fabric tightened. Tape crackled. Something wet slid behind the blacked-out picture glass. At the foot of the stairs, I faced the uncovered mirror. My reflection was there, pale and filthy, holding the certificate like a verdict. Behind him stood rows of almost people, waiting in rooms the real house did not have. My throat closed. Then I said it. Daniel Michael Reeves. Every covered mirror in the house answered at once. Not with one voice, with dozens, men, women, children, my grandmother, my father, my mother, myself. All of them whispering the name back through cloth, paint, paper, and water, as if the whole house had been waiting decades to exhale for one breath. It almost sounded less like hunger than relief itself. The relief did not last. The whispering name folded in on itself until the house went silent so completely I heard my pulse inside my ears. Then the hallway mirror changed. Not like before, not longer, not darker, not pretending to be another room. The glass lost the hallway entirely. It became depth without distance. A black surface full of shapes pressing forward from underneath. Faces rose inside it. My grandfather's first, then my grandmother's, then my mother's sleeping face from the bedroom window. Daniel's infant features appeared and stretched older, becoming a boy I had never met. Then a teenager. Then something like me with the wrong childhood behind its eyes. Every face arrived unfinished, borrowed, corrected, discarded. At last they gathered into one shape. It stood where my reflection should have been, tall and thin, made from everyone my family had missed, and everything they had refused to say. Its skin was not skin. It was memory trying to look alive. When it spoke, it used no single voice. She did not save you, it said. She chose silence. I gripped the death certificate so hard it tore. She begged. The thing continued. She offered names, years, rooms. Children not yet born. Your family called it mercy because mercy is prettier than trade. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to defend a dead woman who had left me rules instead of answers. But the house around me creaked like old bones remembering weight, and every covered surface held still. The thing lifted one hand. Its fingers were my father's. Then Harlan's. Then Daniel's tiny curled fist. You can leave, it said. That was worse than a threat. The front door behind me clicked unlocked. Cold night air touched my neck. Walk out before sunrise, it said, and give me one shape in your place. A stranger, your mother, the lawyer, anyone who has looked and wondered, anyone who misses something enough to stand still. In the mirror, I saw possibilities bloom. My mother safe in bed, Mr. Harlan answering a late call, a neighbor slowing beside the property, all of them ordinary, warm, easy to sacrifice if I allowed fear to become math. Then the shape smiled with my mouth. Your grandmother did it, it whispered. That is why you are alive. I looked at Daniel's name in my torn hand and understood. The bargain was not asking whether I wanted to survive. It was asking what kind of survivor I was willing to become. I wish I could tell you I destroyed it. That would make a cleaner story, a braver one. I would like to say I raised the hammer, shattered the hallway mirror, and watched every stolen face pour out screaming into the dawn. But my grandmother's last rules had been right about too many things, and the thing behind the glass wanted violence almost as badly as it wanted surrender. So I did neither. I stood there until my legs shook, holding Daniel's torn death certificate, while the front door waited open behind me. Cold air moved through the house. Somewhere outside, a bird made one uncertain sound, then stopped, As if morning itself was afraid to commit, the mirror smiled with my mouth. "Choose," it said. I looked at the faces inside it. My grandfather, Daniel, my grandmother, small and gray, standing far behind the others. I do not know whether any of them were real. Maybe they were only masks. Maybe that question was another surface. So I stopped asking it. I stepped onto the braided rug and faced the mirror directly. "I'm not trading anyone," I said. The glass darkened. "I'm not apologizing to you." The faces pressed closer, and I'm not looking away. That was the hardest part. Not the cold, not the whispering from covered rooms, not the shape stretching behind my reflection. The hardest part was staying still while it showed me everything I wanted. My father alive, my mother safe, my childhood explained. My grandmother forgiven. I watched until the windows behind me turned gray. At sunrise, the mirror let go. Not dramatically. It simply became glass again. The reflected hallway shortened. The impossible rooms folded shut. The front door eased closed by itself. I collapsed on the floor and cried after it could no longer use the tears. That was 7 months ago. I did not sell the house. I told my mother it was because of legal complications. Then repairs. Then the market. Lies are easier when people want them. I live here now. Every mirror is covered again. Every window is dulled before sunset. The hallway mirror stays uncovered, polished. Some nights it knocks. Some nights it uses my voice. And some nights, when I am tired, I see Daniel standing behind me, older now, patient as hunger. So if you inherit a house like this, leave before dark. And if every mirror is covered except one, understand this: Simona loved the dead too much, and someone still has to keep them from coming home.